Welcome to another video on the Temple Mount location. If you haven't seen the previous episode, I highly recommend that you do, because it discusses many things to which I will refer in our today's episode. I will leave you a link in the description below for you to access it quickly. I can see that many people are still claiming that the walls on the Temple Mount are remains of a Roman fortress called Antonia, and not the Jewish temple. Even under the commentaries section of my newest video, people are still producing arguments basing their claims on the writings of Josephus that Fort Antonia covered the Temple Mount. Therefore, I decided to make another video where we will look more closely at this subject. Before we will begin, I would like to make a side note. In Israel, there are basically two schools of archaeology. One school, and archaeologists such as Eliat Mazar, who recently passed away, sees the Bible as a reliable source of information that can help archaeology. The other school, and archaeologists such as Israel Finkelstein, are skeptical of the biblical narrative and certainly do not see it as the primary source of information. Finkelstein is sometimes called anti-Zionist because he challenges the traditional narrative of the biblical story and undermines ancient Jewish heritage to the land of Israel. Both schools of archaeology disagree on many conclusions about the findings, but as to the Temple Mount location, there is no discussion in Israel. People who ate their teeth on archaeology in Israel do not doubt that the evidence is clear that the Temple Mount is the location of the Jewish temple. On the other hand, people like Ernest L. Martin, Marlin Sams, and Robert Kornacki are not even archaeologists and live in America and not Israel. I'm sorry, but I have to say this. They came to Israel a few times, thought to themselves that it would be neat if the temple was in the city of David, and started to create a fantasy searching for things that would fit their theory. Of course, it is okay to write fantasy books and make money out of it, but what they are doing is actually lying to people and neglecting evidence that clearly shows that their theory is nonsense. You could even say that their claims are also anti-Semitic in nature, because they say that millions of Jews who are masters of recording history did not preserve the actual location of the temple. Remember, the Jewish people recorded the events of the Bible. Are they saying that Jewish people did not tell their children where the temple was located and simply forgotten? For the Jewish people, it would be even convenient if the temple was in the city of David, but they would have to accept a lie. Archaeology, Jewish memory, geography, and most of all common sense all agree that the Jewish temple was on Temple Mount. Nevertheless, we will look at the claims of this theory and examine the evidence we have. At the same time, do not forget to subscribe to this channel to receive information about new episodes. So let's start our investigation. In this episode, we'll be referring to Josephus many times as he is often quoted by the proponents of the Antonia fortress on Temple Mount theory. It is appropriate, therefore, to give quick introduction to Josephus and his writing. As to the information about Josephus, I'll be referring to the information that can be found in a paper written by Eric D. Huntsman entitled The Reliability of Josephus. Can he be trusted? I provide a link in the description to this paper if you like to read it in more detail. So let's meet Josephus. Josephus Flavius' original name was Joseph ben Matthias HaKohen. He was born in AD 37 to an aristocratic family of priestly lineage. His native language was Aramaic, although Josephus was educated in Greek literature and he was comfortable with the Hellenistic culture that then dominated the Eastern Mediterranean. When he finally wrote the works that immortalized him, he had some surprising turns of events. He became a Roman citizen and had taken the name Flavius Josephus. An awareness of Josephus' multicultural background is essential to understand his extant writings like Jewish War and Jewish Antiquities, which we will examine in this episode. Even though Josephus' writings are an incredible source of information about the ancient past, we must realize that he was not flawless. If we examine Josephus' writings in more detail, we will see that he was sometimes inaccurate, sometimes mysterious, prone to tangents, and even sloppy in his writing. The difficulty of writing in a second language and the author's own personality might explain some of those failings. To the sophisticated reading audiences of Greece and Rome, rhetoric was as important as accuracy. It was a truism that history was nothing but rhetoric, meaning that the authors tried to persuade their audiences that what the authors thought happened, or even what they thought should have happened, actually occurred. Hence, in the famous episode before the fall of Masada to the Romans, Josephus composed an elaborate philosophical treatise for the rebel leader Eleazar. Josephus was not present to hear what speech, if any, Eleazar actually gave, neither were the Roman troops, nor for that matter were the Masada survivors, who by this time had safely hidden in a cistern. The speech, like some other Josephus works, is a literary creation, and while it contains views that Eleazar might have shared, it nonetheless belongs to Josephus. We must also remember that when Josephus describes the fall of Jerusalem, he is working for the Roman Emperor, Titus, and must present events that would favor his master in command. Even when Josephus included questionable actions of the Roman ruler, such as the Roman burning of the temple, he modified them. Thus, Josephus portrayed Titus as anxious to spare the holy edifice, and attributed its destruction to ordinary Roman soldiers and Jews alike. The reliability of the works of Josephus suffered even more after the text actually left his hands. As with any ancient text, those of Josephus experienced the usual problems of copying and transmission. Unlike the Bible, for which the textual tradition is strong, the survival of the works of Josephus is similar to that of other Greco-Roman literature, except for a single fragment of the Jewish War, which dates to the 3rd century AD. The oldest manuscripts date between the 9th and 11th centuries, at least 800 years after Josephus first began to write. So let's keep that in mind when we will look at Josephus' description of Jerusalem before the destruction by the Roman army. Not to say that his description is inaccurate, but we must remember that it is not the Holy Scripture. So the first point I want to discuss is the claim that Josephus writes that Fort Antonia always stationed a legion of Roman soldiers. A Roman legion was the largest military unit of the Roman army and composed of 4,200 infantry and 300 cavalry. And so the proponents of Fort Antonia say that it is a clear sign showing that Temple Mount had to be a Roman fort, because only a space that large could hold a Roman fort with a legion of Roman soldiers. But this is actually a different sign that shows that those that propagate this view did not do their homework. If we look at the writings of Josephus in Greek, there is no word for legion in the description of Fort Antonia. This is the verse where they take the word legion from in the Greek in which Josephus wrote. The translation of this verse goes like this. A Roman battalion/order was always based there, and armed men stood round the porticos during the festivals to keep watch on the people and prevent any revolt. The Greek word tagma can be translated as battalion or order. You can actually paste this word to an online translator and see the result yourself. There is a word for legion in Greek, and it's legione. Therefore, if you find a translation of the word tagma as legion, it is a mistake or an interpretation, but the proper word translation is simply order or battalion. In my last video on the temple location, I explained that a presence of such a huge army unit as a Roman legion does not make any sense. If a Roman legion was actually located in the proper Roman fort on an elevated area as the Temple Mount, the Jews would never be able to take control of the Temple Mount. A Roman legion was a war machine feared by all the armies of the world. And if we go back to Josephus' writings, he says that Jewish rebels took control of Fort Antonia in 2 days. It took 5 months for several Roman legions to take back the control of the Temple Mount. The Jews would have to have Superman or Hulk on their side to conquer a proper Roman fort with a legion inside in just 2 days. Logically, there was no legion in Fort Antonia, but as Josephus writes, a smaller unit of Roman soldiers. How big was this unit? Well, this is a good question. In my last episode, I suggested a couple or few hundred Roman guards. People like Ritmeyer suggest a Roman cohort was located at Fort Antonia, which was generally composed of 480 soldiers. This would be in harmony with the New Testament account of Paul's arrest. In Acts 21 and 22, the apostle is recorded as having been brought up from the Temple Mount by stairs into the castle, which could have been nothing other than the Antonia fortress itself, as he was allowed to address the Jewish people that were standing below on the Temple Mount. In chapter 23, we read that in order to save Paul's life, the tribune ordered 2 centurions to get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. This would have amounted to 2/3 of the cohort that was stationed in the grounds of Antonia. Some people may say that the proposed dimensions of Antonia fortress are even too small to host a Roman cohort of about 500 soldiers. Josephus wrote in War Book number 5 that Antonia fortress was built on a rock that was 50 cubits, which is about 86 feet or 26 meters high. Although the rock plateau on which the fortress stood is a sizable piece of real estate, measuring approximately 148 feet, which is 45 meters, from north to south, and 394 feet, which is about 120 meters, from east to west. It is indeed difficult to imagine that a cohort of about 500 soldiers and their horses could have campaigned inside this fortress. However, I would agree with Ritmeyer who believes that it would be a mistake to limit the boundaries of Artonia to the rocky plateau itself. The Strophion pool, for example, would have provided water for the Roman soldiers garrisoned here and would have been protected. At a distance of about 60 meters to the north is a high rock scarp that enclosed a large area where later the Eastern Roman Forum was built. It is reasonable to suggest that the common soldiers camp out here in the semi-permanent barracks, while the officials and commanders stayed in a more luxurious and permanent accommodation on the top of Antonia rock scarp. And I would like to stress again what I mentioned in my previous video. Antonia Fortress was not built by Romans. They used what was already there. The fort overlooking the Temple Mount was built by Hasmoneans in the 2nd century BC, and only then was it reused and modernized by Herod for the Romans. Another argument that is brought up is the question of water. Some say that because the Gihon spring is close to the city of David, the temple must have stood there because water is necessary for temple functioning. And I agree, Gihon spring was very important for Jerusalem water supply, but it was not the only water source for Jerusalem. On the Temple Mount, Charles Warren documented at least 43 cisterns for collecting water. One of the cisterns, which was numbered 8, is very big and it dates to the First Temple times. If there was nothing on the Temple Mount in the time of Solomon, as Martin and those that follow him claim, why would they bother to create such a huge cistern on the Temple Mount? This cistern number 8 is very similar to the ancient cisterns found in Beersheba and Bet Shemesh, but much larger. The archaeologist Eli Shukron, who have also excavated this cistern and tested the plaster, agrees that this cistern was used in the First Temple times. The Jewish commentaries on the Torah, such as the Mishnah, also refers to great cisterns that were located on Temple Mount. Okay, but some of you may say, well, this is rainwater, but living water was needed. We know that in Herod's time there were actually aqueducts that transported fresh water from the Etam spring. The Etam spring fed the lower aqueduct coming from the spring of Etam near Bethlehem, and Solomon's pools located at the head of the Urtas Valley, whence it was conveyed to the temple court by the subterranean aqueduct, some 10 miles in length. The aqueduct has gone into ruin long ago, but you can actually see still parts of it today. According to the Jewish sources, Spring Etam was the water source for the temple, reaching the temple by the means of the lower aqueduct. This aqueduct brought fresh water to cleanse the temple court of the sacrificial blood each evening and to fill the laver. It would have been built for this purpose by King Solomon when he built the temple. Some claim this lower aqueduct was built by the Hasmonean in the 2nd century BCE, but the Hasmonean would have merely repaired or improved on an already existing aqueduct. We can conclude that Solomon would not have relied on cisterns to supply the large amount of water needed on a daily basis to supply the temple, especially in an arid country that experienced consecutive years of drought. In the description of this video, I will put the Jewish sources referring to this water source. Again, the logic of those that propose an alternative view of the Temple Mount location is questionable. The models they provide shows that the water would have to be pumped up. It does not matter if the temple was in the city of David or on the Temple Mount. In any case, water would have to be pumped up. Actually, as I mentioned, it would be easier to transport water to the Temple Mount than the model that Martin and those that follow him propose. Again, people that favor this questionable theory worry about water for the temple sacrifices, but they don't worry about the space needed to perform those sacrifices. Thousands of sacrifices would be performed during biblical feasts. Herod enlarged the temple platform to enable even more sacrifices to be performed. But even if we take the original dimensions of Solomon's temple, it simply does not fit in the city of David. Another argument that I saw is that Jesus predicted that the temple would be destroyed and no one stone of the temple would be left standing. Then they point to the western wall and say, "See, there are stones, so this cannot be the temple location." Again, this only shows a lack of understanding of what are we looking at. There is nothing left from the temple building. And actually, if you go up the Temple Mount, you can see trees planted on the Temple Mount. As the prophet Micah writes, "Zion will be plowed like a field, Jerusalem become a heap of rubble, the Temple Hill a mount overgrown with thickets." This is a picture we can see today on the Temple Mount. The stones that are left are not part of the temple, but are stones that are left over from a huge supportive structure built by Herod. If you actually go down the western tunnels, you can actually see how big those stones are that were used to expand this massive structure. The Roman soldiers destroyed what they could, but to get rid of those massive stones, you would need explosives or Hulk. By the way, the stones resemble Herodian style. The Romans would not bother to build with such massive stones in a place that they did not even care about. Jerusalem, for the Romans, was always a province that did not matter that much. On the contrary, Herod is known to build crazy projects where he used engineers to create unbelievable structures. A palace on a steep hill in the middle of the desert and a massive harbor city in Caesarea, where he also used massive stones and placed them precisely on each other in the middle of the sea, are just two examples of his incredible projects. And we read that the temple in Jerusalem was his greatest project ever. The massive stones are a witness that this is the place where Herod built the temple. There are of course more things I would like to discuss, but we will leave them for part 3 of this series. As always, I encourage you to comment. Let me know what you think. You can also subscribe to this channel to stay informed about the next monthly episodes on Jerusalem's history. You can also support me by clicking on the join button on my channel main page. This will certainly help me to improve and create more presentations. Have a great day and see you soon.